Hi, I'm Charles with AniCap. The story begins at a magical academy where a talent for magic is valued most. Our protagonist Will has no aptitude for magic and wonders if there's any way for the talentless like him to advance at a magic academy. He isn't sure, but Will frequently goes to dungeons to slay monsters so that he can get stronger even if he can't use magic. One day at the academy, the distracted Will gets called to the front of the class. He is told to conjure a flame using a catalyst, but Will trembles in fear because of his lack of magical talent. Of course, he fails to conjure anything, and the entire class laughs at him. The instructor is really disappointed because this academy is very prestigious, and it's embarrassing how Will can't even use the most basic magic. This makes it clear to the instructor why Will is said to only be an honor student when it comes to note-taking. He says that Will is completely beyond help. Just then, a student named Scion conjures an amazing flame from his seat. Scion gives an insincere apology by saying that he was just helping Will. The instructor puts out the flame and declares that this was an example of how in this world, the supremacy of magic is absolute. Magic is strength, and mages are their heroes. At the academy, a student's talent for magic is how they earn a higher rank. However, a no-talent student that can't even use a bit of magic has no right to be at an academy that gives rise to powerful sages. After class, Scion mocks Will for going into the dungeon again because he's just going there to take out small fry and scrape up some credits. Some girl named Colette intervenes, but Scion can't understand why an honor student like her would defend such a nobody. Colette declares that Will is the hardest worker she knows, and she refuses to let anyone insult her friend. Everyone is shocked to hear her speak this way, but Scion points out that it takes a lot more than hard work to become a Magia Vander. Will stands no chance at becoming one, and Scion is done wasting his time with a no talent like Will. Scion agrees with the instructor as he tells Will to drop out of the academy, but Colette tells Scion to get lost already. Colette consoles Will by pointing out that there's something wrong with their professor, but Will can't blame him because he is right. Will does some smooth talking and tells Colette that as long as he has a cutie like her by his side, then he doesn't care about anything else. Colette gets really flustered and Will apologizes because he was taught at a young age to compliment girls. He says that her cuteness is completely objective though, and this just gets her even more flustered. Colette reminds herself that she is the heir to a noble and she must remain composed. Just then, Colette becomes concerned because Will has gone completely silent, and he explains that he's just admiring how nice of a day it is. Colette then explains that the Magia Vander, who are the most powerful wizards, continue to uphold the sky. Long ago, people were trapped in darkness and didn't even know about the existence of the sky. The world was being terrorized by something called the Celestial Host, but 5 wizards rose up against them. The wizards sent the invaders packing, and they cast a seal over the sky while bringing peace to the world. The title Magia Vander is a title given only to the strongest, and it has been passed down for ages. When Will was younger, some girl named Elfaria told him stories about what lies on the other side of the sky. There is said to be a beautiful sunset that turns all kinds of things bright red. She thought that if they could become Magia Vander, then they would be able to see the sunset. Will wanted them to see it together, so they swore that they would. Will realizes now that this was just a childish promise, but Elfaria was the real deal. She was an incredible talent, and she became the youngest to ever earn the Magia Vander title. Because of this, she left to the top tower, and the talentless Will was left behind. Will is unable to give up on the promise they made, so he works hard so he can stand beside her one day. Afterwards, Will is scolded by Professor Werkner for going to the dungeon again. The worst part is that Will went to the 7th floor, and Werkner fears that Will lose his life one day. Will apologizes and sheepishly asks about his credits, which just gets Werkner more upset. Will did eliminate an evil guard in the dungeon though, so Werkner awards him with 2 credits. Will couldn't be any happier, and Werkner is shocked that he hasn't given up on becoming a Magia Vander. Will wonders what is so wrong about that, so Werkner explains the difficulties that lie ahead for him. Before heading to the tower, Will have to advance to the Upper Institute. To do that, he will need to be proficient in the 3 curricula. The curricula are writing, spellwork, and praxis. He will need a ton of credits in all 3 of them, but Will can't use magic, and he will never be able to earn spellwork credits. Will knows this very well, which is why he focuses on collecting praxis credits in the dungeon. Unfortunately, Werkner must remind Will again that advancing through praxis alone is impossible. Will gets pretty dejected, so Werkner lifts his spirits by telling him to forget about becoming a Magia Vander. Instead, he needs to worry about actually graduating from the academy. Will failed to earn credits in the most recent exam, which means he needs to earn 4 credits by the end of the week. There are only 2 days left, so Will desperately searches his notes to find a monster worth 4 credits. Werkner wants to help him, but he doesn't want to get in trouble, so he says that he's simply talking to himself, and he reveals some report about a certain monster on the 6th floor of the dungeon. It's called a Baskerville, and it's exactly what Will needs, so Will thanks the helpful professor. Unfortunately, Scion heard everything. He comes up with an evil plan, and he is sure that it will finally get rid of the no-talent scrub who is out of his league in this academy. A while later, we find Will on the 6th floor of the dungeon. Will has fought a Baskerville before, so he's eager to earn his 4 credits. He tells his worried cat friend not to worry because he will avoid the monster's flame breath so they don't get burned to a crisp like last time. Nearby, Scion and his cronies search for the monster. They want to take care of it before Will does so that he will be expelled for being short on credits. Scion's buddies are worried about being on the 6th floor, but Scion reminds them that he is one of the elites at the school. Scion has some serious issues as the very sight of seeing Will offends him. He doesn't even believe that a no-talent loser should even be able to speak about the Mage Vanders, and he thinks Will doesn't deserve to be at the academy. Just then, things take a horrifying turn as a monster utterly eviscerates one of Scion's men. This thing is terrifying as the kid's blood drips off its fists, and Scion's friend screams in horror. Will hears the scream and rushes forward as he fears that someone is being attacked. Will demonstrates incredible speed and arrives to see Scion in battle. He is shocked to see that the monster is an evil sentinel because he has never seen one in person before. This beast is incredibly dangerous and it's worth 10 credits. This terrifying monster usually resides in the lower levels of the dungeon, so Will wonders why it's there. The terrified Scion begs for the monster to stay away as he attacks it, but his magic isn't having any effect. Scion doesn't stand a chance, and Will realizes that the sentinel is on a whole other level. Scion desperately fires away, but the fearsome beast just keeps approaching, so Will decides that he has to do something. However, just then Will shocks himself as he wonders if he actually has any obligation to save Scion. Scion has done nothing but make fun of him, and he has bullied Will to no end. His mind is flooded with memories of how poorly Scion treated him, and he begins to think that leaving Scion behind to lose his life would be justified. However, Will remembers something that Alferia told him. She said that he was kinder and braver than anyone she has ever met, and we see that she was the one that gave Will his glasses. Back to the present, Will says that Alferia was wrong. He isn't kind or brave, he just wants to do whatever it takes to stand beside her. Will puts on his battle glasses and dashes forward. He stops the monster's immense attack and declares that he will become a lone sword. Back at the school, Professor Edward urgently tells Werkner that Scion and his buddies went to the dungeon without permission. Werkner is in disbelief, and Edward tells him to use his familiar to find Scion. The kids are in serious danger, so Werkner prepares to do so and asks what floor they're on. Edward explains that they went to the 6th floor, and he is shocked when Werkner declares that if they went to the 6th floor, then there's no need to worry. Edward reminds him how dangerous the 6th floor is, but Werkner explains that everything is fine because that is the floor Will is on. Back in the dungeon, Will demonstrates his immense fighting ability as he fends off the sentinel, and he manages to slice off one of its fingers. The infuriated beast tries to attack Will, but the kid is just too fast. Will soars around the cave and easily deflects the debris that the monster throws at him. Eventually, Will makes it onto the monster's back, and Scion watches in shock as he can't believe that this is the same Will from school. The professors watch the fight from a crystal ball, and Edward can't believe what he is seeing from Will. Werkner then reveals that Will is a true outlier. He has superhuman strength that a mage would never possess, and a body as tough as a dwarf's. That isn't all though, as he also has incredible observation skills that allow him to grasp an enemy's strategies after seeing them just once. Will demonstrates this by dodging an attack the monster just used, and he uses this opening to slice its arm off. Werkner concedes that Will cannot use magic, but in this world filled with magic users, Will is the one and only warrior. Will now takes the monster's giant sword, and as the beast becomes infuriated, Will gets ready for an attack. Scion hasn't moved an inch this entire time as he is stunned by Will's strength. The monstrous beast unleashes a powerful beam attack, but Will stops it with the sword. Werkner continues to explain how powerful Will is by declaring that his slash of the sword surpasses even lightning. Will shows just that as he slices right through the monster's beam, causing massive damage everywhere, and the monster is utterly defeated. Will shows concern for Scion, but Scion is so angry that he makes himself bleed from the mouth. Edward is just as upset, as he refuses to believe that someone who can't use magic is able to surpass magic. A while later, Will returns to the academy to find the very upset Werkner. Will did manage to eliminate the Sentinel though, so he officially awards Will 10 credits. 5 years earlier, we see how terrible Will felt while everyone whispered behind his back. They had never heard of someone who couldn't use magic like him, and everyone wondered how he got into the magical academy. Everyone just assumed that he was used as bait to lure his friend Elfaria to the school. Elfaria had already become a Mage Evander at this point, so the other students assumed that he would be kicked from the academy. Will went to meet with Headmaster Cauldron, and she put a dagger in his hand. Without saying a word, she prepared an attack, and Will sprung into action. He pushed Werkner to safety, and before Werkner could even hit the ground, Will neutralized the Headmaster's attack with just a dagger. Cauldron and Werkner were absolutely stunned, so the Headmaster could only laugh about Will's amazing display of skill. Werkner was then shocked when she declared that Will be allowed to continue attending the Magic Academy. Werkner reminded her that Will is unable to use magic, but Cauldron was extremely intrigued by Will. He was like a sword that yearned to be a wand. Surprisingly, Will still seemed unhappy. He just wanted to know if he would be able to ascend the tower if he kept studying at the academy, and if he became strong, would he be able to be with Elfaria? Cauldron gave him hope as she declared that if he remained undaunted and stood strong, he might be able to achieve his goal. After he left though, Cauldron admitted that she had no clue how things would end for Will, the sword attempting to become a wand. Back to the present, Werkner lectures his students on what it means to ascend the tower. This generally means advancing to the upper institute to become one of the Mage Evander. To reign from the topmost floor like they do, a person must be recognized by the highest center of learning. There are two main ways to advance. One is by creating a new type of magic, and the other is by earning at least 7,200 credits at the academy. Only a very rare few have been able to create a new type of magic, which means that the majority of students rely on earning credits. Werkner scolds all his students though, because they're not even doing well enough to graduate, let alone reach the upper institute. After class, Colette sees how exhausted Will is, and she brings up how everyone is talking about how tough Professor Werkner's class was. Werkner is especially tough on Will, but Will knows that it's because he has completely failed at spell work. Will refuses to be deterred, however, because he believes that being a failure doesn't mean that he shouldn't still work hard. Will is grateful that Werkner gives his students supplemental classes because some professors like Professor Edward don't seem to care. Just then, the two overhear Scion's friends telling everyone that Scion defeated an evil sentinel all by himself. His friends admit to being overwhelmed by the beast, but when they woke up, Scion had slain the sentinel. Everyone thinks that Scion will become one of the top 3 at the school because of this, but Scion is furious because he knows what really happened. Scion spots Will, so he rushes to him and angrily expresses his disbelief. Will is supposed to be a talentless loser, but he was somehow able to fight really well. Colette breaks up the altercation, but Will doesn't tell her anything about what happened. In the headmaster's office, the angry Edward demands that Will be expelled. Cauldron points out that Will is already in his 6th and final year at the school, and it would be cruel to expel him after he has come this far. Edward is furious though, because he doesn't think the academy needs someone who is a warrior and not a mage. Being able to surpass magic without being able to use it is blasphemy to him. Cauldron checks Will's grades and explains that he more than excels at everything other than magic. So much so that he will have several paths to choose from outside of being a Mage Evander. She declares that the academy has a responsibility to produce great scholars for something she calls the fated day. This just further emboldens Edward, so he explains that the issue is Will is determined to become a Mage Evander. That fact is clear to everyone, so Cauldron sees his point and declares that Will should be tested. Also, because Edward has learned Will's secret, she instructs him to administer Will's test personally. If Will fails Edward's test, then she will entrust the matter of his expulsion to Edward. Even Edward is surprised by her decision, and he reminds her that he's not as lenient as Werkner. Cauldron is not concerned, so she leaves the contents of the exam up to him, and Edward gets a sinister smile on his face as he leaves. When he leaves though, we see that Cauldron is pretty confident, so she wants Edward to test Will as hard as he can so he can see the truth for himself. She believes that Edward is the best for the job because he understands the Mage Evander better than anyone, and that is why people call him the Dark Viper Mage. Elsewhere, Will apologizes to Colette because she always has to help him do magic things that he can't do himself, like opening his magic locked locker. Colette doesn't mind, but she notices that he still keeps his sword in his locker. Will explains that he has to because he has never been given permission to carry it on campus. At the study hall, Will writes a report about one of his favorite battles. Dwarves were a race from another world, and they were severely mistreated. They were overworked and even treated worse than the elves. Because of this, they raised an army and waged a war. Colette wishes he wouldn't work so hard, but Will explains that if he loses even just one credit, he won't be able to advance to the Upper Institute. This report isn't too bad though, because he can understand how the dwarves felt. This is because even in the face of the mightiest magic, they continued to fight. They never gave up, and such determination is what Will believes is necessary to overcome magic. Professor Werkner taught him this saying, and it's just another reason why Will must do his best. Colette then notices that Will has a white hair. He rejects her offer to pull it out, but she insists. Just then, Edward interrupts them and instructs Will to come with him to the spell hall. Edward explains that he can't allow Will to continue failing spell work, so he has decided to give him a supplemental lesson. Will is shocked, and Edward tells him to be grateful. He declares that he will ascertain Will's worth himself, but Will is shocked when Edward uses a magic attack against him. Edward simply explains that Will's assignment is to land a single strike on him, and refusal is not an option. However, if Will succeeds, then he will award Will with his first ever spellwork credits. Will is stunned by the opportunity to receive 5 spellwork credits, but Edward reveals that if Will fails, then he will be expelled from the academy. Edward prepares his next attack, and declares that those without talent should not be permitted to even look at the Mage Evander. Edward has given Will a reason to fight, so he decides that it's time to begin, and he unleashes the attack. Back in the headmaster's office, Cauldron reveals to Werkner what she has done. She tells the shocked Werkner that Edward is conducting a test, and he's forbidden from interfering. Cauldron has recognized Werkner's advocacy for Will, but she must also recognize Edward's concerns. She has already decided that Edward will ascertain whether Will is worthy of attempting to become a Mage Evander. Werkner struggles with how cruel her choice is though, because Edward is the closest person to becoming a Mage Evander. Edward was ultimately defeated before, but he's still an ascendant. He has reached the top of the tower before. Edward demonstrates his fearsome abilities now, and Will is shocked that he was able to generate so much power by only using a low-level dark magic spell. Will is no slouch though, and he shows his incredible speed, but his kick is stopped, and Will realizes that Edward's defense is impregnable. Edward mocks Will for kicking a magical shield, and he calls him hopeless. Will is knocked back by a powerful attack, and he's stunned to see that Edward is casting spells with no incantations. They activate instantly, and there's no hole in Edward's offense or defense. Things aren't looking too good for Will, as he realizes that he can't even scratch Edward, and we see that Will's familiar named Kiki runs off. The confident Edward announces that the only magic he will use are his black flames to burn Will, and his shield to repel Will's poultry attacks. Edward prepares his next attack, and Will is horrified to see that he's overlapping a single spell. The attack was extremely powerful the first time, but now he's going to unleash a barrage of them. Edward declares that the talentless need to disappear, and he unleashes the attack. The attack is impossible to escape, so Will is struck several times as Edward demonstrates immense control of his magic. Will is in really bad shape now, and he begins to realize that he can't beat Edward. He is shocked to see what a top-tier mage looks like, and Will wishes that he had his sword. Nearby, Colette worries about Will after hearing that he was going to have supplemental lessons with Edward. She fears the worst, but she is surprised when she sees Will's familiar. Kiki is injured, but she still scratches at Will's locker, and Colette realizes that something bad has happened to Will. Kiki is clearly distressed, so Colette urgently opens Will's locker. Back with Will, Edward points out that if he can't handle someone like him, then Will has no chance at ever becoming a Mage Evander. Edward then brings up the war involving the dwarves and explains that they foolishly incited a rebellion with the force of 10,000 dwarves. He then asks Will if he knows how many mages it took to end the battle. Will tries to get up, but Edward forces him down and angrily reveals that it only took one mage. With a simple wave of his wand, a single mage was able to annihilate 10,000 dwarven warriors. Edward angrily declares that this is the way of the world and a sword will never reach a wand. He wants Will to abandon his aspirations, but Will refuses and proudly announces that he wants to reach the Mage of Ander. Edward pushes him away and demands to know what drives Will to fight so hard. Just then, Will stands defiantly and declares that he wants to be with the person he loves. This answer shocks Edward to his core, and Will continues by saying that he wants to keep the promise he made with Elfaria. Edward is disgusted and refuses to believe that something as simple as love is what is pushing Will to reach for the apex of magic. Will understands how foolish it must seem to Edward, but he doesn't care how difficult the path will be. He is determined to see the sunset with Elfaria. Just then, Colette arrives at the perfect moment and she gives Will his sword. Will thanks her and gets ready for a real fight. Edward calls Will a deviant and points out that he cannot win with the sword. Edward promises that he will defeat Will as he unleashes another attack, but he is stunned when Will slices right through his magic. This makes it clear that he's using a Moria blade, but Edward doesn't care and launches another attack. Will thinks about how terrified he is as he can tell that Edward is going to launch another barrage. This is because it's a terrifying volley of 1,000 flames. Will can't stop his legs from shaking as he acknowledges that Edward is a powerful barrier between him and the Mage of Ander. Will really wants to run away, but he knows that this is the only way through the barrier. Edward declares that the fight is over as he sends out his barrage of magic attacks, and Colette calls out to the charging Will. Will masterfully maneuvers through the attacks and thinks about how there is actually more to the story about the Dwarven War. There was a brave dwarven general named Gareth that fought even as he lost all his comrades. In spite of everything going on around him, he was able to land a single blow. After the battle, in honor of his bravery, the mages recognize the dwarf's status. Just then, Will launches a brick at Edward's barrier and it shatters everywhere. Will then takes to the sky as he declares that the dwarven story is an example of a sword seeing a wand and reaching it. Will uses the ceiling as a launching pad and he sends himself right through Edward's barrier by slicing through it. The battle then reaches its dramatic conclusion as both fighters point their weapons at each other. Edward is then stunned and furious when he realizes that Will cut him. He walks away, but he also declares that Will is rewarded 5 credits. Colette runs out to check on Will, but he's completely exhausted. Cauldron is very impressed with Will, and Werkner points out that Will chose to dive straight into Edward's barrage. He hid himself and attacked from a blind spot overhead. That isn't all though, as Cauldron points out that Will used a strike powerful enough to break through Edward's shield. Will managed to use a slashing attack capable of overcoming magic, and in her amazement, Cauldron declares that it was truly as if Will was undaunted. Another look back shows Will receiving his glasses from Elfaria. This is when she said her final goodbye, and Will declared that he would make it to the tower too. Even if he can't use magic, and even if everything tried to tear them apart, Will vowed to come for her no matter what. Elfaria was shocked when he said that they would see the sunset together, and she promised to wait for him no matter how long it takes. Werkner watched them part ways, and Will told him that this would be the last time that he cried like a pathetic and hopeless loser. Back to the present, Will describes himself as a no talent and a book learner who only excels in writing. Will is a student, but he's also a hard worker. Just then, Will trips, but he demonstrates amazing speed and coordination as he easily catches all his fallen newspapers. Elfaria is in the news for her amazing achievement of creating new original magic. In fact, she's the first to achieve the remarkable feat of inventing 12 magics. Will is of course proud, and he vows to work hard too. He is shocked though when he reads that Elfaria has sent down an order. Will rushes to his friend Rosti and begs him to make magical items for him. Will urgently gets ready and explains everything to Rosti. The order is to collect Frostwalker ice cores because Elfaria needs a lot of magic catalysts. Because of all this, contributing students will be compensated. The target is on the 4th floor of the dungeon, so Will begs Rosti for some magic items. Rosti is a good friend and explains that he already made improvements to the previous version of a magic item. Rosti hands over the new version and Will thanks his buddy. Rosty's always looking out for Will though, so he makes sure he eats something and reminds him to take care of himself. Shortly after, Will arrives at the 4th floor of the dungeon. There he finds a ton of students, but he expected this because an order from Alferia is very important. Will eagerly tells Kiki that it's time to get started, but he's startled when the ground shakes. This shake was caused by Scion, as he eviscerated some Frostwalkers, and Scion's friends cheer him on. Scion isn't satisfied with destroying weaklings like this though, because he's still upset about how strong Will was when he saved him. Will, on the other hand, is very impressed by Scion and determines that he must hurry because at this rate, there won't be any Frostwalkers left to hunt. This area is pretty crowded though, so Will has no choice but to go deeper into the dungeon. Will ends up finding a girl in danger, so he rescues her. The girl is stunned because Will doesn't use any magic, and he simply destroyed the monsters with a sword. The girl thanks him for saving her and introduces herself as Iris. Back at the academy, Professor Werkner explains that creating new magic is a profound achievement, one so grand that it guarantees unconditional advancement to the tower. Magic usually takes on the name of the person that created it, and in the case of the dark magic spell Dax Dakins, its namesake is a mage from ancient times, Fire Watchman Dakins. This means that if one of his students come up with some new magic, then they can carve their name into history. A student wonders if Alferia is really as good as the news says, and Werkner agrees that she's unbelievably good. Authoring 12 original spells is unheard of, so she is one of the greatest mages in history. Colette can't believe that Alferia is Will's childhood friend, and Alferia even has the entire school in an uproar after issuing an order. Colette's friend teases her because she's obviously jealous, and she says that Colette must be afraid that Alferia is going to steal Will away from her. Colette denies it, but Werkner must scold them for being too loud. Colette takes a moment to think about Will, and she wonders if he's in the dungeon again because of Alferia. Will is, of course, and Iris says she recognizes him as the kid from school that has no talent. Will wonders why she doesn't have any disdain towards him for being talentless, but Iris says that she can't look down on the person that saved her. She knows that he can't use magic, but she respects people that have their own gifts. Will can tell that she's a good person, and she declares that she wants to become a Mage Evander, one of the people holding up the sky. Will then explains to us that no one knows the real sky, and even now their world is hidden. The remarkable magical energies of the Mage Evander cloak everything, creating a false sky and the Great Barrier. Legend says that when the barrier falls, the world will once again be enveloped in darkness, and the calamity will begin. Students strive to meet orders because they believe that it will help support the sky. Just then, Iris reveals that she actually met Alferia before. Iris was alone in the dungeon and ended up running into trouble. This is pretty similar to how Will met Iris, so he assumes that she gets into a lot of trouble. Iris described how she was surrounded by monsters and her life began to flash before her eyes. The next thing she knew, Alferia was standing before her after freezing all the monsters. It's a really fond memory for Iris, and she vows to do her best for Alferia. That's why she came to the dungeon today, but she fears that all the other students have already taken out all the Frostwalkers. She isn't able to pick up any of them with search magic, but she notices that Will is doing something on his own. He explains that when Frostwalkers move, they leave ice fragments behind. However, the ones he's finding are more than double the size of normal fragments. This makes him confident that there's a really powerful Frostwalker up ahead. Iris is shocked by how he can know all this without magic, so Will explains that while magic is great, it's not absolute. Will has some knowledge and wisdom, and he declares that experience can make up for the rest. Will gears up as he prepares for battle, and Iris is stunned when the giant Frostwalker appears. Will uses his amazing speed to keep her from getting crushed, and Iris is terrified to see that the monster is actually what they call a Frost Rex. Just as Will predicted, it's a really powerful monster, and it shows how terrifying it is with a loud roar. Frost Rexes are the highest form of Frostwalker, and it's worth 6 credits. It's also a special monster that is specific to the 4th floor. Just then, Will must dodge its beam attack, and the beam turns everything it touches into ice. Will tells Iris to wait while he fights, but she's worried about him, and explains that physical attacks won't work on a Frost Rex. Anything that touches it freezes instantly, so close combat is a terrible idea. The only way to deal with one of these monsters is long-range magic attacks, so Iris begs Will not to fight. Will confidently tells her not to worry though, and he explains that he has fought monsters like this plenty of times. Will prepares the magic items his friend made him, and he takes to the sky. He dodges the monster's attacks and maneuvers through the battlefield. The Frost Rex loses sight of him, so it attacks in every direction, forcing Iris to take cover. Will gets into position and launches the magic items onto the monster. The items latch onto the beast, and they're attached to a rope. The beast tries to hit Will with its beam, but it's no use as Will is already on the move again. Will uses his insane speed to avoid getting attacked, and he wraps the rope all around the beast. The Frost Rex keeps trying to attack, but Will has already finished covering it in rope, and he thinks about how Frost Rex monsters are weak against fire and explosive attacks. The Frost Rex uses its most powerful attack to freeze everything in the surrounding area, and it begins to turn Will into ice. It's too late though, as Will's preparations are complete. He uses the device on his wrist to create a flame, and he ignites the rope. The fire makes its way all around the monster and causes the magic items to explode. The blast is incredibly powerful, and when it finishes, there's barely anything left of the Frost Rex. Will credits Rosti for making such great magic items, and he plans to thank his buddy later. Iris is in awe of him, but her demeanor quickly changes to something much more serious. Will is known for having no talent, so what she just witnessed doesn't make any sense to her. Will is nothing like the rumors say, so she thinks about how she will have to report this back to a certain someone. Just then, Will says that they have plenty of ice cores, and Iris goes back to being her other self as she agrees that it's time to get out of the dungeon. When alone, Iris shows her true self, and she thinks about how impressive Will was when he used creativity to compensate for not being able to use magic. He also has a nose for battle that is backed by experience. She determines that while he's no mage, he's definitely a powerful warrior. Just then, Iris shockingly meets with the Mage Evander. They were having a meeting about how they need more promising seedlings for the fated day because they cannot allow what was written in the lore to come to pass. Iris is known as the Watcher, and they ask her if she found anything useful. Iris reveals that she found one interesting prospect, a no-talent warrior named Will, who she now recommends for a position in the tower. Some Mage Evander think it's a terrible idea, but the white-haired guy named Zio thinks it would be interesting. Some of them assume that Will would be inferior to them, but Zio says he would accept anyone as long as they are useful. Eleanor calls him a barbarian, but a guy named Cariot stops him from fighting. He points out that the Grandmaster Festival is coming up, and they can just wait to make a decision about Will until after they see those results. The Mage Evander agree that useful students will be revealed during the festival, and they begin to leave. Alferia stays behind, and she once again promises to wait for Will. A while later, we watch as students are tested, and we learn that a student needs at least 7,000 credits to advance to the Upper Institute. This is also an absolute condition for becoming a Mage Evander. Students engage in combat with some sentinel-looking things, and Colette shows off her fighting ability. Scion does as well by destroying a golem, and it is announced that they both passed the exam. Colette now has 7,300 credits, and Scion has 9,800. Will fights a golem as well, but he is mocked for trying to punch it instead of using magic. Will gets distracted by some students, and he's eventually defeated. This only makes the mockery worse, as students talk about how he can't use magic, and he can't even scratch a golem. A couple students then amaze everyone with their abilities. The girl is named Lihana, and the guy is Wignall. Their magic is very impressive, and they easily defeat a golem. They both pass the exam, and each of them now have a total of 10,020 credits. Another guy steps forward and uses some ice magic to attach some ice crystals to several golems. These shards turn into ice flowers, and the guy easily freezes several of these golems. This guy's name is Julius, and the other students are amazed that he even froze their golems. Julius passes the exam like the other top students, but he has 10,050 credits. Julius declares war on the other top students, and they use their abilities to destroy his ice flower as they accept his challenge. All the other students are in awe of the three of them because it's already confirmed that they're going to the Upper Institute. They are also the only ones with credits over 10,000. Credits are used to measure a student's potential, but Will doesn't have enough of them to graduate, let alone advance to the Upper Institute. This is Will's last year at the school, and he only has 5,500 credits. Julius insults Will and instructs him to never be in his presence ever again. Julius's friends glaze him up way too much, and they are sure that he will be scouted at the upcoming Grand Magical Festival. Will overhears them, and he can't believe that it's already time for the festival again. At lunch, Colette tells Will that his only option is to get scouted at the festival. This is because advancing to the Upper Institute on writing and praxis alone isn't realistic. He has less than the required 7,000 credits, but there is still a chance that he can be scouted so he can ascend the tower. Will agrees with her, but she isn't the only one with this idea. All the other students are trying to turn things around for themselves, and they will be out for blood during the festival. The Grand Magic Festival is held every 2 years. Several competitions will take place, and high mages will come down from the tower as scouts. It's a contest between students from different tower factions, and there are quite a few of them. Colette is sure that if one of those factions chooses Will, then he will surely be admitted as a tower member. Will knows that this hardly ever happens though, and he would have to perform some kind of magic that will put a high mage to shame. That isn't all though, as Colette explains that there are people called Watchers that appear to snatch up outstanding talents and carry them off to the tower. Will has heard of these Watchers, but he points out that they're just one of the Academy's 7 legends. Will doesn't think that a no talent like him should try to stand out at the festival, so he just plans to help with operations. Colette thinks this is a chance for him to change the way people see him, but Will reminds her that people didn't like how he competed during the last festival 2 years ago. This festival went down as the worst one in history, and Will says that he stood out for all the wrong reasons. Outside, everyone practices their magic, and it starts to feel like the festival really is drawing near. Luckily for Will, scouts from other capitals will be coming, so even if he can't ascend the tower, there are other paths he can take. The festival is a great way for students to show what they are capable of. This is why Colette wants Will to participate, but he points out that he can't even use magic. Just then, Colette notices that a barrier has been placed on a nearby locker. Colette is pretty sure that she can break the powerful spell, but she uses Kiki to quietly remove it. Opening the locker reveals a hidden stairway, and they decide to explore. Down below, they find some students betting on who will win certain events at the festival. This is underground gambling, and students are placing their bets on the top students. Will is shocked to see Scion there, and Colette proactively keeps Scion from starting trouble. She warns him not to get violent, and Will wonders what Scion is doing there. Scion doesn't answer, but his dumb friends say that it's not like he's trying to see what the betting odds are, because there are rumors that there's a huge spread between him and the top students. Scion loudly scolds his dumb friends, and Colette mocks him for being worried about the top students. Scion of course denies it, and points out that the number of credits he lags behind them are just credits he lost in writing exams. Scion is sure that he's just as strong as the top students, but he remembers that he doesn't have to explain himself to Will. The next day, Colette offers to go with Will to the dungeon, but he explains that he's going to work at the tavern. This tavern is on the outskirts of the capital of magic, and it's on Slumland Street. This place is filled with dwarves, and Will works there as a server. Will speaks to the guy he sees when delivering papers, and this guy can't believe how hard of a worker Will is. Will delivers papers in the morning, attends the academy during the day, and then waits tables at night. Will explains that he doesn't have a scholarship, so he needs to work hard to pay his tuition. The old guy thinks that the Grand Magic Festival can fix everything for Will, but Will says he could never enter it. Will is scolded for slacking off, and his boss points out that Rosti is working much harder. Will apologizes for needing his help at work, but Rosti doesn't mind since he enjoys the challenge of having to work without magic. One of the servers quit, so Rosti's helping Will at the last second. The place gets even more lively, and all the dwarves show how well Will gets along with everyone. Later, Rosti wonders why Will doesn't just ask Werkner to find him a better paying job. Will explains that he causes enough trouble for Werkner as it is, and he doesn't mind working for the dwarves. They are hardy people that Will respects a lot, and they welcomed him in with open arms. Just then, Will drops the spoon, and as he reaches for it, Julius enters the place. Julius insults the gross-looking tavern, and he mocks Will for working there. He thinks it's a good fit though, since it's only right for a no-talent like Will to serve barbaric dwarves. The old dwarf is insulted, and Julius wonders what the look in his eyes is. Julius reminds him that they are an inferior race that immigrated here from another world. He tells them to know their place, and he takes a seat. The dwarven world was destroyed by the celestial host a long time ago, and the dwarves escaped to this world. Julius continues to insult the tavern, and he demands that he be served. Unlike the elves, dwarves are treated with disdain, and if a dwarf were ever to lay hands on a mage, their standing would instantly be in danger. Tensions rise as the old dwarf is clearly upset, and Rosti brings some food to Julius. Julius and his friends insult the food as well, as they think that it would only taste good to a barbarian. Julius then calls the dwarves filthy beasts, and tells them all to get out of his country. The rude bunch has a good laugh, but Rosti notices that Will has gotten very serious. Julius and his buddies think that Will is there to wait on them, but Will demands that they take back everything they said. Julius is annoyed by him, but Will explains that there's actually a lot of meaning behind the dwarven food. Will declares that it's not something that should be mocked, and everyone watches in shock. Julius rudely points out that none of them can use magic, and explains that if something is disgusting, he will call it disgusting. Julius then kicks the food right onto Will, and his friends tell Will not to get any ideas about fighting back. These idiots just mess with the wrong guy though, and Will instantly drops both of Julius's friends. Will knocked them into unconsciousness with just one move, and he tells Julius that the savagery between them is more senseless than that of the dwarves. Julius becomes furious and explains that he hasn't faced humiliation like this in a really long time. Julius's rage shows in his power as the room begins to freeze over. He warns Will that he just picked a fight with the worst possible person, and Will just barely manages to dodge Julius's dangerous attack. Things get more intense, and Julius manages to pin Will against the wall. Julius then uses his wand to taunt Will by pushing one of his ice flowers, but he is shocked to see that Will is still defiant. Julius decides that encasing Will in ice won't be enough to appease him, because no one is here to see it. He demands that Will enter the Grand Magical Festival so he can humiliate him in front of everyone. Will destroys some of Julius's ice and declares that he will enter the festival. The old dwarf tries to stop Will, but Rosti can tell that it's far too late because Will is really angry now. Julius declares that he will defeat Will and make sure that he will no longer be able to stay at the academy. Will has had enough of this guy and tells him that he will have to apologize to his friends once he beats him. A while later, the headmaster gives a short speech and announces the start of the Grand Magic Festival. Fire Faction scouts are told to keep their eyes peeled so they can find a diamond in the rough among all the participants. Spectators then watch as participants ride on Charizards during one of the matches. Spectators are amazed by the intense race, but it's pretty clear to them that Lihana is going to win. This is expected from the one they call Miss Perfect because she stands at the top of the school. Headmaster Cauldron observes the crowd and is glad to see that scouts are mixed into the crowd with their eyes gleaming. Iris points out that mages coming from outside the tower always create some tension. The scouts are now having their own competition to find the academy's most promising students. Lihana of course wins the sky race in record time, and it's her second time winning in a row. Iris says she has to leave for now as she has work she must tend to. Iris then changes to her other persona to say that there is a certain person she has to cheer for. Nearby, Sion prepares for his match and thinks about how he can't let down a girl in need. A look back shows Colette asking him for help even though she hated it. Colette asked him to join her team and Sion accepted. Sion now rushes to meet with her and he thinks about how Colette must have finally realized that he's a better partner than Will. Sion is then of course shocked to see that Will is actually part of their team as well. In order to participate in the festival's crown attack match, each team must have at least 21,000 combined credits. So for Will to compete, their only option was to invite Sion. Sion refuses to help a no talent, and he wonders why Will is trying to enter an upper level event in the first place. Just then, Sion feels shivers down his spine as Julius enters the room. Will gives a cold stare, and Sion realizes that it isn't meant for him. Colette then reveals to Sion that something happened between Julius and Will. Julius entered the crown attack match, so Will decided that he had to face off against him no matter what. Sion is furious because not only did Will humiliate him in the dungeon, he is now looking right past him. The festival continues outside, and the two announcers will be some guy named Mike and the #1 most hated professor, Edward. Mike complains about having to work with Edward, but he takes it back after Edward shows how terrifying he can be. It is then announced that the crown attack match is next, and some elves prepare the field. They recite an incantation that causes giant magic circles to form everywhere, and their combined power changes the entire landscape around the stadium. Unlike the other events, Crown Attack is a team competition held between 3-man teams. Teams start at the outer edge of the field and make their way to the central stadium. At the center of the stadium is a crown, and the first to take it wins. Aside from naturally occurring obstacles from nature, participants will have to avoid tons of traps arranged by the professors at the school. Smashing through the shortest path is allowed, and so is obstructing other teams. We then learn that out of all the events at the festival, the Crown Attack is the most brutal and heated. Edward gives some commentary, but Mike interrupts and points out that this will be a great test for their brilliant students. Mike has heard that the secret gambling halls heavily favor Wignall's and Julius's squads as the winners. Will's team is the least popular because Will is a no talent, and the crowd laughs at him for entering the Crown Attack. Squads begin heading out, but Werkner is shocked to see that Will is participating. He tries to convince Will to back out, but Will apologizes and explains that even if it makes him a laughingstock, this is a bout he wants to win. All squads are in place, and the Crown Attack begins. Julius's team is the first to reach a trap, and it shockingly ends up being a large group of golems. It's a large-scale obstacle, and spectators wonder if they will even survive. Just then, everyone is stunned as Will sprints right towards the golems. The crowd mocks him though, because he could barely even scratch just one of these golems during the exam, and they assume that he's just running to the end of his life. They don't know that Will's team is well prepared, and Will instructs Colette to do what they planned. Colette uses earth magic to cover Will's arm in stone, and he absolutely destroys one of these golems. This causes a large burst of energy to be emitted inside the stadium, and the entire crowd is at a loss for words. Scion is in disbelief as Will continues his barrage of attacks, and Mike declares that the first to make it past the gauntlet of golems is the no-talent Will. Scion could never forgive himself for being saved by a guy like Will, so he did everything he could do to get stronger. Will is still somehow outshining him, which makes Scion furious. Will's team has taken the lead, but this means that they are the first to encounter the next trap. Will uses his immense strength to block some rocks, and Colette uses magic to summon several swords across the battlefield. Will then masterfully uses these swords to destroy all the traps surrounding them. One of these traps remains, but Will quickly destroys it as well. Mike announces that they have passed the second trap, and he is in awe of this dark horse that Will's team has proven to be. The crowd refuses to believe that Will is behind these amazing feats, and they assume that it's all because of Colette's magic. The scouts know better though, as they can tell that Will has an elite ability to detect and counter the traps. Edward chimes in to point out that Will's movements are that of someone who spends all their time in the dungeon. Edward praises Will for his knowledge and experience, while also commending his incredible reflexes. The crowd is still skeptical, but Iris cheers Will on anyway. One team refuses to fall behind Will's, but they just end up falling to a trap of wild plants. Everyone tries their best to advance, but the traps are merciless. Will's team has a commanding lead, so Mike wonders if the no-talent Will really be the first to reach the stadium. Nearby, Julius hears the commotion coming from the stadium, so he wonders what's going on. He has just finished destroying a trap, and his team informs him that Will is in the lead. They fear that Will is going to win, but Julius isn't worried one bit, and he tells his team that he will handle it. A short while later, Mike announces that Will's team has reached the final area called the Enchanted Woods. Here, Will is met by a chain circle trap, but he just uses a sword to cut the circles out so they get aimed at each other. The circles destroy each other, and Mike is in awe of how unfazed Will is. Edward was the one that set up the minefield of magic, so he doesn't have any comments about Will passing it. Will charges forward, but he knows that the closer they get to the stadium, the more likely it will be for them to encounter other teams. This means that the real fight between them will take place in the Sea of Trees. Will's team is in the lead, so he decides to set up an ambush and wait for Julius. However, just then, Will is narrowly impaled by a shard of ice. Colette is shocked to see that Julius somehow got there before them, and Will wonders if his team is hiding somewhere. Julius then attacks with a barrage of ice shards, so Will reminds himself to focus. Will prepares to attack, but everyone is stunned when Scion wipes away all the ice with his flames. Scion begins an incantation, and Colette can tell how dangerous it will be, so she begs for Will to get away. It's too late though, as Cyan angrily finishes preparing his attack, and Colette must quickly protect Will from getting hit by it. The attack causes massive damage, and the shockwave from it can be felt even at the stadium. Will has no clue what just happened, and he's horrified by the damage that the attack caused. Cyan tells Julius to leave as he's just in the way, and Colette realizes that Cyan was aiming for both Julius and Will. Cyan explains that he has played nice up until this point, but now it's time for him to get his due. Cyan demands that Will fight him, but Will is absolutely stunned. Will wants to know why Cyan is so upset, but Cyan just tells him that he doesn't need a reason to crush him. Colette tries to stop Cyan, but Julius halts her movement with a wall of ice. Will becomes concerned when Julius attacks her, but he must defend himself against Cyan. Cyan's attacks disarm Will, so Will tries to remind him that this is no time for them to be fighting each other. Cyan refuses to listen though, and he just tells Will to pick up his sword. Will sees that he has no other choice, so he lifts his sword and prepares for battle. We then get a look at the past from Cyan's perspective. Cyan was disgusted by just the sight of Will because he has always been a pathetic no talent. Cyan couldn't bear to look at him every day, so he decided to take it upon himself and make Will less painful to look at. Cyan removed a mean note someone put on his back and told Will that he would allow him to be his underling. Cyan became upset when Will ignored him, but he quickly saw how emotionless Will had become. Will coldly told Cyan to get away from him, and Cyan has despised Will since that day. Back to the present, Will runs for cover as Cyan unleashes his flurry of attacks. Cyan demonstrates the immense control he has over fire as he manages to grab Will with it. Will breaks free, but Cyan just keeps on attacking. Cyan then insults Will for just jumping around like a wild animal who's only concerned about survival. He demands for Will to attack him back, but Will refuses. Cyan continues to demand it of him, but Will tries to point out that they're on the same team. What's most important though is that Will wants to keep his promise to the dwarves, so he can't be bothered to fight Cyan right now. This of course just upsets Cyan even more, and Will begins to wonder if fighting Cyan is really his only choice. Mike and the audience are shocked to see the teammates fighting each other, and Mike turns to Edward to hear his take on the situation. Edward says that fighting amongst team members is out of the question, regardless of the reason. Not only will it ruin their chances of winning the match, it will also look really bad to the people scouting them. Edward calls it truly deplorable, but Mike is stunned to see how happy Edward looks while saying that. The scouts are disappointed because Cyan showed a lot of promise in terms of his grades, but his behavior during the match makes them realize that he's still just a schoolboy. Rosti is worried about Will, and Iris comes out of nowhere to introduce herself. Iris calls herself the person that can get along with anyone, and she continues cheering for Will. Rosti didn't think that Iris was the type to cheer for someone, so Iris explains that she wasn't really interested in Will when she first heard about him. After meeting him though, she considers herself to be blessed. Rosti sees that there are a lot of people that seem to care about Will, and that includes Colette. Back at the fight, Colette determines that she has to hurry up and stop Will and Cyan from fighting. Julius antagonizes her though, and she must defend herself from his attacks. Julius is a sneaky guy, so Colette realizes that he used that attack as a diversion, and he sets off a trap beneath her. Just then, everyone in the Coliseum is stunned when they see that there are several Juliuses all over the battlefield. Julius has intercepted all the other teams as well, and Wignall is impressed that he was able to go through with his declaration of war. Julius says that he will destroy him with his secret weapon, but he is shocked when Wignall reveals that he was waiting to return his flower to him. This flower destroys Julius, but it was just a clone, and Wignall's impressed to see that Julius had a trick like this up his sleeve. It's to be expected though, since Julius has the potential to become a Mage Evander. Mike loses his mind as he can't even explain what's going on, but he credits Wignall for shutting down Julius. A scout from the elf faction assesses the situation, but she just considers Wignall to be average. He neither exceeds nor fails to meet expectations. This lady named Chalia is a serious introvert though, so she wants to rush back home before she dies from being at this huge event. Everyone else in the stadium wonders if the winner of the competition will come down to Julius and Wignall. Will's team was really close, but they ruined their chances by fighting each other. Cyan's friends know that Cyan hates Will, but throwing the match because of it is not like him. Cyan is going too far by trying to get Will kicked out of the academy, but one of his friends thinks that Cyan has a good reason. Another look back shows Will getting bullied relentlessly, and he wondered why everyone enjoyed tormenting him so much. His classmates all thought so little of him, but Will knew better than anyone what a failure he was. Will knew it would be too selfish to wish for them to just accept him, so at the very least, he just wanted them to leave him alone. This was Will's mindset when he rejected Cyan's offer to take him under his wing. With everyone tormenting him, Will decided that above everything else, he needed to focus on making it to Alpharia. Just like back then, Cyan attacks Will, and he angrily begins another incantation. This allows Cyan to summon a falcon made of flames, and Will wonders if it's a guardian. This guardian nearly destroys Will, but he masterfully dodges while cutting off one of its wings, and he uses the opportunity to go after Cyan. Unfortunately, the Firebird has high-speed regeneration, so Will have to destroy its core. Guardians are usually used to defend, while its user casts a spell, but this Firebird is attacking from all directions. The battle intensifies, and it begins to take a serious toll on both fighters. No one is more shocked than Edward, as he realizes that Cyan has surpassed the student level. Not only can he use a high-level fire spell, he even summoned a guardian. Having such precise magic control is incredible, and the Fire Faction scouts have taken notice as well. Their reports say that Cyan has a lot of potential, but he still falls behind Lihana and the rest of the top 3. Him always being counted out just makes them realize that Cyan has a serious chip on his shoulder, and that is why you can never tell which students will have hidden potential. The head scout tells the others to report back to their leader because this festival has a surprisingly good group of students. Will is completely exhausted at this point, and he acknowledges that Cyan has gotten a lot stronger. Cyan is still filled with rage as he points out that Will was a much better fighter when he defeated the evil Sentinel. Will once again tries to explain that there's no reason for them to be fighting, but Cyan just gets more upset. Cyan reminds Will of all the ridicule and embarrassment that he caused, and he wonders why Will doesn't resent him. Will becomes upset too now, as he reveals that he does resent Cyan. Will has imagined getting back at him over and over again, but right now Will is determined to defeat Julius. Cyan hardly listens to him, and expresses how infuriated he gets anytime Will refuses to give up, even though he's just a no talent. To make things worse, Will always seems to look everywhere, but he always ignores him. Will is then shocked when Cyan demands that he look at him. Cyan has had enough, so he declares that he will end Will's life if he keeps ignoring him. Will is stunned to hear what Cyan really thinks of him, and he realizes that while he always thought it would be too selfish to ask for people to accept him, it's actually what he needed. Cyan is clearly offering to acknowledge him, so Will decides that he will have to meet his challenge with everything he has. Cyan is glad to see that Will is finally getting serious, so he begins another spell. Will focuses on this fight and prepares to time Cyan's magic so he can go for a counterattack. Will is shocked, however, when he sees that Cyan is using wide-scale destruction magic while also sending out his guardian. This combined attack is incredibly dangerous, but Will has already mapped out its path. He skillfully makes his way through the attack, and Cyan is shocked when Will slices right through the core of the bird. The battle reaches its climax as both fighters prepare their most powerful attack, but Colette comes out of nowhere to stop them in their tracks. Colette looks pretty tattered up, so she explains that she whooped Julius's butt and he just disappeared. Cyan freaks out after seeing how messed up her shirt is, and he reminds her that she's a daughter of a noble. Colette blames the guys for fighting in the first place, and she reminds Will that he has a score to settle with Julius. She declares that she will handle things from here so Will can go after Julius. Cyan angrily says that he won't let anyone get in his way, but Colette just starts yelling at him for ruining Will's chance at looking good to the scouts. Will calms her down with a compliment, and he tells Cyan that they can continue their fight another time as he leaves. This of course doesn't go well with Cyan, and he demands that they fight now. Back with Mike, he announces that the lead teams will soon enter the stadium. Everyone wonders who will be the first to appear, and we see that Julius and his buddies are making their way through the gate. They make their way inside, and everyone celebrates as Mike declares that there's no one else there to stop them. However, just then, Will skies over the entire crowd and makes a forceful entrance by crashing into the ground behind Julius. Will declares that he is there to challenge Julius, and Julius is clearly ready. Up the wizard tower, Alferia seems to be enjoying the peaceful day, but she's really just fast asleep. Sarissa the maid wishes Alferia would take her job as Mage Evander more seriously because she's always just staring at the world below. Sarissa has her look over the potential candidates that the scouts are recommending, and she points out one that they consider to be the Ice faction's best candidate. It's Julius, and he's causing quite a stir at the festival. Sarissa even thinks that he might become Alferia's successor. Alferia takes a look at the report and agrees that he could become her successor if everything stays the way it is. Back at the festival, the match reaches its climax as someone just needs to grab the crown. Julius is glad that Will was able to make it to the end because he wouldn't have been satisfied if he won without humiliating him first. Will tells him not to worry because until Julius apologizes for the dwarves, he has no intentions of backing down. Julius calls Will a mouse that he's going to toy with, and he covers the arena in a cold mist. Will assumes that Julius is using the smoke screen to attack, but he quickly realizes that Julius and his team have surrounded him. They begin attacking, so Will decides that he has to keep moving so he doesn't get hit. He plans to judge their locations using their attacks, so he waits for them all to fire at him. Will determines where all three of them are, so he goes to attack one, but he's surprised by a fourth shot. Julius taunts him by calling him a laggard, and Will is stunned when Julius reveals that him and his buddies never even moved. The entire stadium is then just as shocked when they see that 4 other Juliuses have appeared. As if that weren't bad enough, Julius reveals that his clones also explode. He makes one of them blow up, encasing Will in ice. Edward has a terrified look on his face as there's no mistaking that Julius is using a certain type of magic. Werkner is horrified as well because Julius is using the secret arts discovered by the genius and unrivaled Alferia. Alferia created 12 spells, and Julius has somehow learned how to use one of them. This spell creates copies of its user, and Will demands to know how Julius is able to use Alferia's magic. Julius laughs like an absolute psychopath and reveals that his talent is simply what allows him to do it. He learned this secret art just by studying it on his own. Julius says that Alferia isn't so impressive after all, and he declares that soon he will expose her for all to see. Of course, Will is infuriated to hear his girl talked about this way, so he shatters Julius's ice and charges right at him. Will finds himself in a pretty tough spot though, as Julius's clones move exactly as he wishes, and they can even use magic. Will is startled when they all stop attacking, and they form a cage around him. Will can't break free, so Julius taunts him and summons a giant ball of ice. He declares that this is the end, and he crushes Will. The entire crowd is in awe of his immense power, and Edward points out that Julius was able to win the fight without even taking a single step. This is ideal for a mage, and it's clear now why Julius was able to obtain thousands of credits. Julius uses this moment to speak to the scouts, and he points out how impossible it is for him to be defeated after learning one of Alferia's secret arts. Julius says that he will prove to them that he deserves to be Alferia's successor, and the crowd erupts with cheer. Iris determines that Julius was just putting on a show for the scouts, and he just used Will, who's as quick and agile as a monster. Iris knows better as she says that it's not over, and Rossi says that Julius would look like a real fool if he doesn't win after doing so much showboating. They both seem to know something, but everyone else is shocked when Will shatters Julius's giant boulder of ice. Will thanks Julius for helping him cool off because he always gets hot-headed when it comes to Alferia. Julius is determined to humiliate Will, so he attacks again, but Will easily dodges this time. As he takes out Julius's friends, Will explains that Julius hasn't perfected Alferia's spell. The crowd is stunned, and Edward realizes that Will just hit himself to get an advantage, the same as when they fought. The crowd becomes confused when Julius's clones start falling apart, and Will reveals that Julius was only able to control his clones with the help of his friends. This means that Julius can only use Alferia's magic briefly. Will says that he has no right to be Alferia's successor, and Julius becomes enraged. We look back at Alferia after she agreed with Maid-sama about Julius being her successor. However, she says that it isn't a successor that she longs for. Instead, what she wants is a lone sword by her side. Will explains that while guardians act on their own, the clones Julius was using must actively be controlled. Because of this, Julius had to rely on his friends, and it's clear that he's just a phony. The enraged Julius calls Will a no talent as he attacks, but Will shows that he can easily defend himself. Julius is determined to prove Will wrong, so he once again uses Alferia's magic. Will expertly dodges all the attacks coming from the clones, and Julius thinks about how he can control 4 clones at a time, but without his friends, he's reduced to holding a defensive position. Julius is still confident that he could win though, because there's no way for Will to know which Julius is the real one. Of course, the fool is stunned when Will finds him and blasts right through his ice wall to land an attack. Will explains to the startled Julius that the internal temperature of his ice clones made him easy to find. If the clones aren't controlled perfectly, the cold leaks out and ice crystals even begin to form at their feet. Julius begins to really lose his cool now as he loses the rest of his clones, and he demands to know why Will knows the spell better than he does. Will's answer is simple: he and Alferia are childhood friends. They were raised in the same orphanage, so he knows her magic very well. He admired it and studied it, but he could never catch up to her. This is why he knows all the strengths and weaknesses of Alferia's magic. Julius calls Will a no talent one last time before he attacks, but Will is in complete control now. Will compliments Julius because up till now, no one has been able to replicate Alferia's magic. However, he makes it clear that Julius is nowhere near her level. This is because the clone spell that Julius can barely even use properly was invented by Alferia when she was only 2 years old. Will exposes him for being a fraud, and Julius thinks about how excited he was when he learned the spell. Reality begins to set in though, and he realizes that he was only on the same level as Alferia was when she was a toddler. Julius has completely lost it now as he laughs like a psychopath, and he uses his rage to create 8 clones at once. The crowd is amazed, and Julius says that he's not one to be underestimated. He has abandoned any hopes of having full control of the clones, and he plans to simply use sheer numbers to pound Will into the ground. Julius is sure that he will win now, but he just gets more infuriated when Will says that he used to battle against 10 Alferias when they were kids. Julius begins his barrage of attacks, but Will calmly starts taking out each clone one by one. Julius keeps trying to get away, but things aren't looking so good for him as Will masterfully makes his way across the battlefield. Will launches his sword to finish off the last clone, and he uses a powerful punch to absolutely destroy the real Julius. The crowd goes absolutely wild as Mike points out that the no talent Will has somehow defeated an elite with over 10,000 credits. Will's friends celebrate, and Colette rushes to him. There is no one left to stand in his way, and all Will has to do now is grab the crown. However, just then, Will is shocked as Wignall takes the crown first, and he says that he took his time while Will and Julius fought. This is just another swing of events in the chaotic match, but it's over now, and Wignall is announced the winner of Crown Attack. Up the tower, Maid-sama tells Alferia that the match is over. Alferia is completely distraught though, and asks if there's a spell that allows someone to change the past. There isn't, so she wonders if there is one to erase a person's memory. Maid-sama wonders what this is all about, and she's shocked to see the condition Alferia is in. Alferia was horrified to hear Will talk about how she used to beat him up in the past, and she explains that she was just trying to keep Will all to herself. Back at the arena, the angry Scion keeps being angry as he can't believe that Will even managed to defeat Julius. Colette rushes to Will, and Scion vows to be the one to defeat him. Will apologizes to Colette for letting Wignall take the crown, but she is okay, and Will is just glad that he was able to keep his promise to the dwarves. That night at the tavern, everyone celebrates how Will defeated Julius. All the dwarves thank Will for fighting for them, and Werkner thanks them for taking care of Will. The dwarves humbly say that they didn't do much, but Werkner still asks them to keep watching over Will. Later that night, Colette expresses her disappointment about Will not getting scouted by the tower. It's likely because their team fought amongst themselves and they didn't even win the event. Colette blames it all on Scion, and Will explains that Scion rudely rejected the invitation to their celebration. The old dwarf tells Will not to worry about not being scouted because he won the fight for their honor, and they got the apology that Will wanted. Best of all is that Julius is now doing work in the tavern as punishment. Julius does what his boss tells him to do, but he laments how he won't get scouted now because of the no talent Will. Julius releases his frustration by working hard. Colette can tell that Werkner is concerned about something, and he explains that things might be different from now on. Will showed a lot of what he is capable of during the festival, so he wonders how Will will handle things when he returns to the academy the next day. Colette assumes that the other students will have a newfound respect for Will, but Werkner warns that it might not be what they expect. When they return to school, some guys ask Will to come with them to the dungeon. They reluctantly admit that Will has ridiculous strength, so they beg him to choose their team for the upcoming praxis. This praxis is a week-long dungeon dive. Just then, another group interrupts them. They don't want another team stealing Will away from them because they were going to ask him to join their team. Other students jump in, and soon Will is swarmed with requests to join teams. Colette calls them all shameless for asking Will to join them, even after years of bullying him. She assumes that Will feels the same way, but she is wrong, and Will couldn't be happier to be wanted by everyone. Colette has completely lost him, and she realizes that Will has been deprived of friends for too long. Colette gets accused of keeping Will all to herself, and some girl offers to split the credits earned from the dungeon dive. Colette steps in to break them apart and says that Will can't team up with anyone because they have plans to go shopping. That night, Colette panics after getting carried away because it seems like they will now be going on a date. Her friend Rose teases her about it, but recommends that she get prepared even if Colette says it's not an actual date. Colette agrees with her, and Rose suggests that she wears something cute. Will tells Rosti about his plans with Colette, but he explains that Colette kinda persuaded him. She did this by saying that they need to buy equipment for the praxis. Rosti is glad to hear that Will is going to be shopping alone with Colette, and he smiles like a creep. The next day, Colette waits for Will, and she's now determined to make sure this shopping get-together turns into a date. Colette is in awe when she sees Will, and Will compliments her on her new look. He says that she made his heart race, and she freaks out. Just then, they're both surprised when Rosti apologizes for being late. Rosti introduces himself to Colette, and Will says that he insisted on coming along. Colette is horrified by this turn of events, and Rosti taunts her. From there on, Rosti gets in the way anytime Colette tries to interact with Will. Eventually, Will notices that something is bothering Colette, so she points out that the closeness between him and Rosti is weird. Will assures her that Rosti is a good guy, and he just likes to be close to his friends. Rosti brings them some drinks, but he didn't get one for himself, so he could share with Will. Colette refuses to let that happen, so she offers to share hers. Tensions rise between the two, so Rosti tells Will that he can go ahead of them and get his sword fixed. Colette agrees and says that the dwarves won't be happy if mages like them show up at their forge. Will is completely oblivious to what's going on, so he just leaves to go to the forge. After he leaves, Colette comes right out and demands to know why Rosti refuses to leave Will's side. Rosti doesn't hold back either, and he explains that he cares about Will more than anyone else in the world. The two then go toe to toe, arguing about who is closer to Will. Back with Will, he finally starts to wonder if his friends don't like each other. Just then, Lihana comes out of nowhere to speak with Will. Lihana is known as Miss Perfect, a person who stands high above the masses, and someone who's the exact opposite of Will. Will wonders what she wants, but Lihana just asks him to follow her. Will follows her all the way to some house, where Will sees the other top students. The final term of their last year in the academy means that it's time for the all-student praxis, and Lihana reveals that she wants to form a party with the 5 of them. Julius and Scion can't understand why Lihana invited Will, and Will thinks about how these are the 2 people that hate him the most. Lihana takes his terrified expression as a no, so Will realizes that she is an airhead. Scion refuses to just let Will ignore him, so he angrily goes to confront him. However, before he does, Wignall uses his powerful magic to change their entire surroundings. He points out that mages are not as barbaric as the dwarves, so Scion stops being a jerk. Wignall used illusion magic, which is a unique type of magic that summons fantasy landscapes granted only to the elves. Things start to calm down, so Wignall wants to hear what Liana has to say. Liana explains that she simply wanted to form a party for the dungeon dive. She wanted to join the 4 strongest mages with the person who stood out the most at the festival. Will has something that they are lacking, and it will help them in the dungeon. Julius doesn't agree because Will can't use search magic and it will just slow them down. Scion has been in a party with Will recently and he doesn't want to do it again. Wignall points out that they're just bitter after losing to Will, but Will is still insulted. Wignall explains what they refuse to acknowledge, and he says that Will has the brute strength of the dwarves and monster-like agility. Even though there isn't much sophistication to his fighting style, Will's sword still managed to defeat both their wands. Julius doesn't take his words lightly and points out that Wignall is still behind Liana in credits. This is just more of a reason to respect her opinion, so if she sees something in Will, then Wignall decides that he will just respect the no talent. This is more than he can say for the 2 other guys, and this gets them upset. Liana reveals that she wants to use all their power so she can go up the tower as the top student. She wants more fame and honor, as well as a better future for herself. Liana was scouted at the festival and now has a guaranteed post-graduation placement, but that isn't good enough. In her house, members of her family generally die pretty young. To prevent their total ruin, Liana must deliver overwhelming results. Ascending the tower won't be enough because she must also become a Mage of Ander. Liana is sure that they all have ambitions of their own, so she tells the guys to drop a coin in a cup if they agree to her proposal. Wignall instantly agrees because there will be no party capable of achieving better results than them. Julius wants more credits, so he doesn't have any other choice but to agree. Scion tosses in his coin as well, so this only leaves Will. Later that night, Will returns to his worried friends. They went looking for him by the forge, but he was nowhere to be found. Will is very serious, and he reveals that he has decided to join Liana's party for the Praxis Dungeon Dive. The next day, Werkner explains that the Praxis will begin in 10 days. Floors 7 through 10 in the dungeon that were originally off limits will be unlocked. This will allow students to fight over level 5 enemies and other high credit monsters. This is the only opportunity students will have to earn more than 1,000 credits at once, so it's a really big deal. Most importantly, if students can defeat any of the floor keepers, they will earn a large number of credits. In theory, students might even be able to earn full Praxis credits all at once. Edward informs the students that there's also a chance that they will lose their lives. Even just last year, 4 students were eaten by monsters. He tells them to forget about playing hero, as recklessness is prohibited. Professors will be stationed nearby, but that hasn't stopped students from losing their lives before. As students enter the dungeon, Liana points out that she never invited Colette. Colette doesn't care and just declares that she is going if Will is. Rosti wasn't able to go, but Will was happy that he at least prepared a lot of magic items for him. The Praxis is about to begin, and students are informed that base camps have been set up on each floor. If the lower levels prove to be too dangerous for them, then students are told to get to safety immediately. With that, the Praxis begins, and Will puts on his battle goggles. Elsewhere in the dungeon, someone was told to retrieve something in secret. There is someone else with him, and this person removes a person's head from their body in the most brutal way possible. Thanks for watching my recap. Subscribe to the channel for more videos.